Welcome to our webinar this evening. Good evening to everyone. So our webinar tonight is on dinner table syndrome. And we're going to pull up a PowerPoint and do some introductions and then move through our plan this evening. So please bring up that PowerPoint for me. Sorry, just give me 1 second here. Okay, sorry, I'm going to share the PowerPoint here. Sorry, I had misunderstood. I thought someone else was going to share my PowerPoint for me. Okay, sorry about that. So welcome to our webinar on dinner table syndrome. First, I'd like to introduce myself. So I am the moderator for this evening. So you can see me there on the slide. So as you can see, I was born deaf, grew up in Toronto, and work as an ASL instructor and tutor. And I do that through a number of agencies, colleges, and also on a freelance basis. Before we get started, I wanted to open us this evening with a land acknowledgement, and we have a short video with that. All right, so this is a collaboration between Saskatchewan Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services and Deaf Children's Society of BC, Language for Life, and then additionally with Silent Voices. So some things to know for our webinar this evening. Oh, I'm seeing my PowerPoint is frozen here. Where am I right now? And oh, we're just seeing your second slide. Apologies for the tech issues here. Let me take a look at that. Okay, my apologies. Here we go. All right, perfect. So our collaboration. So this is a collaboration between the Saskatchewan Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services, with Deaf Children's Society of BC and Language for Life and Silent Voices. Some things to know for our evening, as you can see in the slide. The webinar tonight is being recorded. We want this evening to be a safe space, and that's something we should keep in mind, that it is our goal to make this a safe space. We're here to respect each other and share ideas. We're going to do an introduction to dinner table syndrome. And we also have 4 deaf panelists who are joining us this evening, and we'll introduce them a little bit later on. After the panel, we'll have a question and answer, and then we'll wrap up. So hopefully you enjoy our plan for the evening. So to start us off, we're going to just briefly discuss what is dinner table syndrome. And that's a situation where there's a group of hearing folks primarily that are using spoken English, and there's one person, at the table or in that situation that is left out of the conversation that's happening in spoken English. So they're not able to participate in that conversation. And whether it's at the dinner table or in a group, sometimes it can happen without those folks realizing that the deaf person is being excluded and is not able to participate in that conversation fully. So it can go without being recognized. And though it might not be recognized, it can still be very challenging, and conversation might not just flow easily. So we have our panelists here tonight to talk about their experience and to shed some light on this. So we have our deaf panelists. We'll introduce them here. As you can see on the slide, we will have 4 panelists. Venu is our first panelist. This is Venu's name sign. Venu is originally from India and moved to Canada and lives in British Columbia. And you can see some additional information about Venu on the slide. Next, Ashley. A brief introduction there about Ashley on the slide. She's grown up deaf in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and she works at Saskatchewan Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services as a CCC in a preschool as an educational assistant. Alicia is originally from Africa and has moved to Canada to study and intends to become a doctor. Yes, currently in high school, grade 12. And this is Alicia's name sign. And she moved from Nigeria. I'm not sure. I think that's a sign for Nigeria. So she moved here from Nigeria in 2017. She loves dancing and wants to become a photographer. And now she's in grade 12. And I'd like to now ask our panelists to please come on camera. And just saying which interpreter should be spotlighted, and it'll be both of us. Okay, so the first question we have for our panelists, can you think back to a time where you experienced dinner table syndrome? And then can you please explain that situation, what had happened? And do you think dinner table syndrome still happens today? Vinu, did you want to start?
Hi, everyone. My name is Vinu, and I live here in British Columbia. And I just would like to thank the organizations for hosting tonight. I think this is a really rich discussion. I remember experiencing dinner table syndrome for sure. Even now, when I get invited out to dinner sometimes or to a meal, it's not that fun. Often, as deaf folks, we're excluded from that conversation and left out from, the happenings around the dinner table. It still happens, unfortunately. Most often, we're having a meal with folks who are using spoken language. So typically, people will say hello, but they keep it brief. And you can see that people are laughing and enjoying themselves, and we're often left out.
Thank you, Vinu. I appreciate that. Ashley, same question for you.
Oh, I can think of a number of times I've experienced dinner table syndrome, from the time I was a child. And it still happens. It's really just sort of a part of everyday life. As soon as you step out of the house, it it really is everywhere. As a deaf person, because we don't hear, we're often surrounded by hearing folks who use spoken language. Um, even thinking about wearing my hearing aid, it's often a challenge to communicate. For example, if you're out in a restaurant or a store, out with hearing friends or family, it's sort of, you know, just part of the everyday, really. And it's connected to language and the fact, growing up, having to communicate or trying to communicate, feeling left out. Sometimes I would feel like I wasn't even in the room. People would be laughing, and I could see that they were having a conversation, and I was never able to participate in those conversations in a fulsome way. And, just because I can't hear, I always felt excluded. And my family didn't learn sign language, and so that really impacted me, my experiences, my able to interact with them and communicate with them. And I always felt left out, and I always felt that maybe I wasn't worth it to take the time to be involved. And so it's not just the dinner table where this happens, it happens everywhere, in the car, out in the world, really, you know, quite regularly.
Yeah, thank you for that response. I completely understand where you're coming from. Um, Now, Kisanet,
Hi, everyone. I moved here to Canada not too long ago, and my family isn't fluent in sign language as well. So I still, to this day, have trouble connecting with my family. I'm often sort of left on my own, feeling a little isolated, feeling a little left out, never really being a part of the conversation. So it does happen a lot.
Yeah, thanks for that response. Alicia, you next.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's really about communication, and I find it so hard to communicate. And, if there's no interpreter there, I just think, oh, what's the point? It, yeah, it's really so difficult. And when people don't know ASL or they can't be bothered, it makes you feel kind of like, okay, forget it then. You try to be patient and, or you write back and forth, but that's really a difficult way to communicate. So it's not great.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your experiences and your stories there. I can definitely understand, and your experiences resonate with me. I think many deaf folks would understand the experience as well and share similar experiences. So, moving on to the second question we have on the slide, how does that make you feel? If you're being left out of a conversation, how do you end up feeling? Vanu, did you want to start talking about how you felt in those experiences?
Well, I've been really looking forward to tonight. I think about the dinner table and family and what that's like. We're all busy in the day doing our own things, and that meal, that dinner table is a place to come together as family and connect and really talk about your day and, what happened and how that went for you. And I really realize at that table when folks are using spoken language and you have your deaf child left out. And I think about my experience in India growing up with my parents and my siblings, and they were talking about their day, and I could see by their facial expressions that, something must have happened. And they would, I'd ask them what was going on, and I just felt so left out. And, or they'd say, oh, it's nothing. Oh, it's nothing. And it used to make me feel so terrible. Um, I just felt like I was the only deaf person in the world, really, that I was going to just have a terrible life because all of these hearing people had this privilege that I didn't have, and they seemed to have all of this information and access and just an abundance of it. And I never had any of that. And so I think about the dinner table, just how much you don't get all that information that you're missing out on and how left behind you feel and how you miss out on all of that information and how it's so important. And so I used to sort of think of it as a business transaction almost. I would just come to the table, eat my meal, and leave. And now that I am married myself and I have a daughter who is hearing, my wife is deaf. And so we just have one child. And so our child is fluent in sign language. And I think about my daughter and I think about how she could be left out of that conversation because my wife and I are chatting. And I often think to myself, oh, okay, we have to think about her and how that impacts her. And, you know, I thought about how things happened with my parents at the dinner table, and I want to really make sure that that doesn't impact my daughter in the same way. And so my wife and I really slow down the conversation we're having. We make sure that she can understand and keep up with what we're talking about, and that she feels it's really about attitude, that she feels that she is part of our conversation, that she is part of this fulsome, uh, discussion that we're having, and that she's able to have access to all that information. So we make sure that she can understand us. And I remember when my mom came from India to visit, and she joined us at the dinner table, and she felt left out as a hearing person at our dinner table. because she didn't speak spoken English. And so the languages at the table were in sign language or spoken English. And it was a real challenge for me to try to figure out how to include my mother in that conversation so I could have that conversation in sign language and then sort of translate for my mother. And it was a real exercise in patience for myself. And I realized what that was like. And I was sort of the interpreter in the middle. And then I really thought a lot about my childhood and growing up, and I really gained a different perspective on what that was like, and thinking about, again, my own growing up and what that was like for my family and for me.
Interesting to think of the different dynamics at a dinner table and, how dinner table syndrome could impact various people and, bridging the communication gaps at a dinner table. Really interesting there. That's a really good point. Thank you so much for sharing that. We'll go on, Ashley, next.
Oh, geez, how did it make me feel? It made me feel like I wasn't worth it. It made me feel frustrated. Uh, I didn't have the language to express myself growing up. And so I always sort of held on to those feelings. And, I always felt like the communication was so surface level. And I felt traumatized by the experience. Not being able to be included is very difficult. To confront barriers daily is awful. It was an awful experience for me, to be honest. I always felt less than. I would try my very best to engage, and I just more often ended up feeling uh, quite horrible, to be honest.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's not a good feeling, definitely. Thank you very much for sharing. Kisanet, do you want to add to the second question there?
Well, thinking about the dinner table and you see people laughing and joking, and I've certainly had experiences when I'm at a deaf table when I experience that camaraderie and that inclusion. But when I'm around spoken language and I'm the only deaf person there, I often feel dismissed. I miss pieces of the conversation. I can't keep up. I miss that connection with people, and I feel very frustrated and I feel very impacted by that. It, quite regularly I have that experience.
Yeah, definitely that feeling of frustration. Yeah, thank you very much. And Alicia, did you want to talk about how you feel in these situations?
Well, when I think about family dinners and I'm eating my dinner, trying to figure out or follow along, I tend to just eat my dinner and leave. I go wash the dishes or go to my room or play on my phone or do something else. And then, you know, I don't often get asked even sort of how I feel or get included in that conversation. And I see people making those connections, and it's hurtful. It makes me feel very upset.
Yeah, a little bit boring at the table and feeling upset for sure. I think most deaf people have been through those experiences of feeling upset and left out, not feeling valued, feeling worthless, being in a conversation, but no one's asking us, how our day was. I definitely understand those feelings and that whole experience. Thank you very much for sharing that. We'll now move on. We'll move on to the third question here. Does dinner table syndrome only happen at the dinner table? What do you think? Vanu, we'll go to you first.
Does dinner table syndrome only happen at the dinner table? Well, I think certainly that table is a barrier for sure. But I think that it really happens in lots of places. It happens in your family room when you're watching the TV or the news, and somebody's talking or they're on the phone or they're talking about the show on TV, you miss all of that incidental learning. You miss all of those sort of side discussions, all of those comments. So, you know, I think that happens, for example, if something serious was happening on the news, you'd miss all of that. I think about my brother, and he was very good at like bringing me in on if something had happened in our family that was an emergency. Oh, something happened with our uncle, it was emergency. He would make sure, hey, hey, guess what? This is what happened. And then my brother would tell me, but I would always hear it last. And just thinking about my parents talking about something, my brother would listen to that conversation and then he would let me know what happened. And I was always the last to know, like, what? And then, my brother was always my interpreter. And, he was done when he was done. And so it was challenging for me for sure. Another example of this occurring is in the car. I would look out the window and watch the world go by when we were in the car. But I think for me, those three particular places, the actual dinner table, the family room, and the vehicle, those really stand out for me.
And Ashley, did you want to answer number three? Does this only happen at the dinner table?
Well, it happens, like Vinu said, in the dinner table, in the car, at restaurants. Um, that experience is that feeling is often when you're trying to communicate anywhere and somebody says to you, "Oh, don't worry about it. Oh, I'll tell you later." That always makes me feel terrible. I am starving for knowledge. I want to know. Every time I would ask something and somebody would dismiss that, it's always a challenge. You see things and you see people talking and you see this excited dynamic or whatever it is, and you want to be a part of that, but you can't participate because you don't know exactly what people are saying. You're not sure how. So often when you're driving, you experience that. People are talking, but you're left out of that conversation in a restaurant. People will give you oh, something happened, oh, later, or they give you a short version of it. So it happens everywhere
A restaurant
and
is a great
often.
example. That's great. Thank you very much. And Kisanet, to you, does this only happen at the dinner table or does it happen in other places as well?
Well, it happens in many places. I have an example about a birthday party. It was my birthday party. I was very excited. I was thinking about how much fun it was going to be. And then I remember my mom uh, had invited some kids over, and my mom's friend had come over. And I was asking, you know, she was asking who some of the people were. And it was just so awkward to try to communicate. And some of the kids, I didn't know them very well. And so, again, just that strange dynamic and that struggle trying to connect. And a lot of, again, dismissing and feeling left out. And I ended up going on my phone because I couldn't even participate. I just sort of needed to find something to amuse myself with on my own. And I just really wish my mom had asked me, like, what do you want to do? Who do you want me to invite to your party? because I wanted to have people there that knew me and that knew me for a long time. And some of the kids that were there, I didn't know, and it just felt so awkward for me. And I had wished that I could socialize with some deaf friends. That would have been so much more fun for me.
Yeah, getting to partake in that conversation and, have some fun rather than being left out and not being able to
Exactly.
participate. Yeah, thanks very much. Alicia, is this only at the dinner table or elsewhere?
Well, can you ask me that again?
Yeah, but does dinner table syndrome only happen at the dinner table, or can it happen somewhere else that you're feeling left out? Where can you have that same feeling that might not be a dinner table, whether that be a restaurant or, we just had another panelist say that in a car, Vanu was talking about while in a car, everyone's chatting and you're feeling left out. Where else have you experienced that?
Oh, I've experienced that, for example, in healthcare at the hospital. I remember having to go into the hospital and my mom had parked the car and just waiting. And we went in and the doctor was there and they were talking to my mom and I could see this whole conversation happening and I had no idea what was going on. And so again, I just sort of sat there while they talked, and I had no idea whether it was important or not, what the problem was. I had no clue what was happening. And then later, when I got home, I wish I had known what was going on. They were making these decisions and they had told me, and I wasn't even able to participate in in this conversation at all.
Thank you for that. And I was thinking I could add to that as well. I would say it definitely doesn't only happen at a dinner table. If you think of an event like a wedding, it's common to feel left out there. Um, oh, and Ashley, did you have your hand up? Oh, you can
Oh,
go ahead.
I had thought of something else, but then it's now slipped away. I'll let you know if it comes back.
Oh, sorry. 1 second here. Just Ashley first. Yeah, so Ashley first, and then we'll go over to you. So 1 second here. Ashley, go ahead.
And I apologize. I did have something to share, but then it has slipped my mind. So please do come back to me. I'll let you know if it if I can remember what I was going to say. I've forgotten.
Okay. Next, Alicia.
Yes. Let me collect my thoughts. Thinking about being excluded at parties, at birthday parties. And oh, geez, sorry. Again, I'm not sure what I want to say right now. So please.
Yeah, no problem. Kisanat.
Well, just thinking about Alicia's story about the hospital. I do remember a time when I was younger and I had to go to my GP. And I had no idea why I was going there. And it was for a vaccine. And I didn't understand why I was there. And so the doctor, I realize now that the doctor should have hired an interpreter when they realized that I was deaf. But at the time, they thought, oh, well, your mom's there. It's fine. I'll just speak to your mom. And I kept saying to my mom, what's he saying? What's he saying? What's going on? And my mom just didn't really tell me. And so she just kept talking with the doctor. So I remember sitting there in the office, not understanding what a vaccine was and what was happening or what it was for. I didn't realize, like, I had no idea. And I wish I would have known before I was there. I wish somebody would have explained that to me. I wish I would have been aware of what was going on.
Yeah, sometimes family, isn't always willing to get an interpreter. and to, have that interpreter come into the situation. Vinu? Yeah, an experience that I had, being invited over for Christmas dinner or, anything similar to that. You would go and you have to be so patient. That is a skill that you really have to refine. And, maybe you go over to the dinner and everyone's talking, so you see that the TV's on and can just watch it. And I do feel like now I've had enough of that in my life. I don't have patience. I think I've run out of them. And I just, I've now shifted kind of my attitude and how I approach those things. So, I will be invited by cousins or whoever to go for dinner. And I used to, kind of go in and try to bluff a little bit. And, they'd invite me and say, "Oh, sorry, I can't make that. I'm a little bit busy with something else." But now I just tell them, I'm actually not interested in going because I'll just feel like I'm going to be left out. But we'll suggest if appropriate that my kids go or whatever. But whenever they want me to go there, I tell them this needs to be a sign language event. I'm not just going to go to this table and sit while everyone has their conversation and not participate. So I try to be upfront about that.
I do understand that, Vinu. It is an exercise in patience. And as you get older, you find your voice, if you will, and you really hit your limit, and enough is enough. So I resonate with that, absolutely. And I did want to talk a little bit more about wedding celebrations, or, for example, going to a hospital and the family members are all talking about what's going on at the hospital and feeling left out. I mean, we could go on and on. This particular um, exclusion doesn't just happen at the dinner table, it happens everywhere. Alicia?
Yeah, it just reminded me of when there's a conversation happening. Uh, as a deaf person, wanting to be involved and making that decision to, ask friends or, have people over and have those positive interactions, whether there be, an interpreter there or something like that. But, um, making sure that you can try to do something different. I remember I had gone to a dentist and, it was in a mall area. So we were headed through the mall, going to the dentist. And there was a form to be filled out, and I was given that. So I was also messaging back and forth, uh, or trying to message back and forth to kind of get clarity on what was going on. And I was supposed to, go in when it was my time. And, I went in and kind of did the hellos and all that stuff. And I didn't have an interpreter there, so it was just me. So, I had gone in and they were going to do the dental work that they were doing or whatever the appointment was for. And then after I got home, I headed home, and I really had regretted that I didn't have an interpreter. I wish that I had an interpreter there that I could have communicated, and it's something that I realize I would have to do better the next time. That I need to make sure that there's an interpreter there so I can have that communication.
Yes, we do need that access, don't we? 100% agreed. It's not easy. Is it anybody want to add anything else before we move on to question 4? I think Ashley.
Yeah, it's happened to be quite often. At school, elementary school in particular, it can be very challenging. I had hearing aids, but I couldn't hear everything, and everything seemed very loud. And it's really challenging to lip read all day, especially with the teachers. I faced a lot of challenges when, the teacher would break us into small groups or talk to us in small groups. Anything where there was a group, it was really hard to communicate. And, I would try to keep up as best I could and clarify, but I ended up getting teased by some kids. And it was just, it was really an awful experience. It did not make me feel like I was part of the class and part of the discussion. I just felt like, kind of, what am I doing here? What's the purpose here? How am I supposed to learn and develop skills and language, develop my communication skills when, as a child, I didn't have that language and I couldn't sign. So I just felt like I held everything in. I had stuff that I want to say, but I couldn't really keep up with the conversation, didn't have the language for that until, late 30s, someone had mentioned to me, maybe you want to learn sign. And that was one thing that I was like, oh, I have been missing that growing up. I didn't have that. And, people had told me that I couldn't sign, so I kind of felt stuck and I wasn't really sure what to do. And I was like, oh, who's going to listen to me? Who's going to help me and support me? Who's going to, be my teacher? Who's going to help me grow? And I really had no one. And it felt very heavy. And it was that kind of a situation that, again, when I started learning ASL, it was really an impactful experience on me. And, when I started to sign and I was like, oh, I can do this, and people would listen to me. And I realized that, as I became older, that conversation and that communication was a must. You know, it's so important to communicate with your deaf and hard of hearing kid in any situation, in every situation, and make sure that they feel like, it's worth them being involved and, that they're in the same world. Often, we feel like we're in a bit of a different world. We have our own language, our own communication, or sometimes, no language and communication. And it's not fun. It's not enjoyable by any means. My thoughts would be, please, help them to grow, and your kid's worth making sure that they're involved.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it makes me think of talking about school during COVID. I really had to figure out how to advocate for myself. At school, there was different issues or things that would happen. I realized I had to navigate, and I started to share with my family about how I felt. But, I realized I didn't have enough sign for us to communicate, and I was feeling really frustrated. And I wasn't able to communicate with my family. I feel like folks weren't really, they were just kind of getting by and not doing what they're supposed to do. And I went to a Silent Voices event, and there was an interpreter there, and people that I could share language with. And my mom finally understood it. And I think it took quite a while, but I think at that point she finally understood it. So then we went into the school, and I was able to share some of how I was feeling and what had been going on. And that's something that has to be an ongoing process.
Absolutely. I think that's great. I really appreciate you sharing that. It's definitely important to have access to services. Oh, pardon me. I jumped ahead. My apologies. And just remembering, it's not just deaf and hard of hearing people who experience dinner table syndrome, it's also the deaf-blind folks as well. Sometimes families will balk at bringing an interpreter into a family event because they feel that it's for families and it feels awkward to bring in a stranger, although that can be very beneficial. So, on to question 4. What would you suggest families and educators do to include deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind individuals? Binu?
Yeah, I would suggest you really have to overcome those attitudinal barriers. And it's not a one-way thing. You can't say, oh, it's their problem or whatever. We all have to, we all have to participate. And us saying, "Oh, it's the hearing folks that are making me feel left out and not included." For myself, I now, with my family, realize that I have done some of that. My hearing kid has felt left out, and we need to realize, when it's being done to us and when we're also doing it to other folks, um, and realize the attitude that goes along with that. It brings me back to when my mom was here visiting. I had to make that effort. My mom would ask what was going on and didn't know what was happening. And it brought me right back to when I was experiencing that, where I didn't know what was happening. And I had to make sure that I had an attitude shift to make sure that I took the time to, have my mom connected and my daughter able to communicate. And it all comes down to attitude. And when you have that right attitude, the one to want to break down barriers and include people, um, that's what makes the difference. And it's important to remember that, the deaf person, can't learn how to speak or can't learn how to hear, whereas the hearing folks in this situation can learn how to sign. They have the ability to learn ASL. And it's simple as that, I think. Start learning some sign. There's so many resources now online, YouTube, wherever you can find them that has resources for learning ASL. It's not that hard to do anymore. The resources are out there, so I would encourage people, the hearing people, to learn how to sign, to then enhance the inclusion of the deaf folks that are in that interaction, and it'll reduce the number of miscommunications and misunderstandings, and also ensure that the deaf person's not isolated in the situation. And if it's deaf parents or deaf parents going out with their deaf friends, make sure their hearing kids aren't being left out of the conversation as well. So ensure that a conversation happens, and whether that's writing back and forth, whatever it takes, use the patience that you have to ensure that everyone can communicate. And I know one thing that happens far too often with deaf people is leaving out deaf-blind individuals. As deaf folks, we can get to chatting and we realize we have not included the deaf-blind individuals. And again, that comes back to attitude. Deaf people will blame the hearing people for leaving us out, but we also need to look at the things that we're doing that could be leaving other people out. And for me, I think about deaf-blind individuals. So that's something that I need to be aware of as well, that I'm being as inclusive and accessible in my communication as well, and that we're valuing everyone being a part of that communication.
I think that you nailed it. I think that self-reflection is so important. And I think that we have to continue to reflect on our attitudes and who's being left out of the conversation. Ashley?
Yeah, again, I would just emphasize, um, you know, have a good conversation with any deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf-blind um, individual. The family really needs to learn ASL. They need to, make it a game, make it a story, any kind of short sentence, maybe 10 minutes of time that is about learning ASL with a deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf-blind person. Just, sit with them at the table, anywhere really. It doesn't have to be the table, but, make it fun. Everyone um, can spend some time to learn a little bit, and it could be a good idea to take an ASL class. It's a great language to have. You want that your kids are going to feel like they can express themselves and communicate with someone and develop their understanding of things, their language, their social and conversational skills. you know it goes back to their mental, physical, and emotional health. It will really help that person to grow if the family takes the time, to sit down at the dinner table or anywhere else that, you find that moment of quiet time and spend that time so that the kid knows that they're worth that conversation, that they're valued, and that they're seen as worthwhile. So I would encourage, even teachers, take some ASL classes. If you're in a special ed kind of environment, take some ASL classes, find a way that, if it's a family, if you know someone who's deaf, deaf-blind, maybe they have the ability to do some social supports or do some conversation support. It doesn't have to just be one person. It doesn't have to be that one person who we all communicate with. I think often it's moms that we talk with, and you know, uh, just having that good eye contact. Um, having that eye contact so that the child knows that you're open to communicating with them. It'll do wonders for their physical and mental and emotional health. Um, Language is so key to all of those things developing. So I think that's what I would say.
And their mental health, their self-esteem, their confidence. I mean, all of those things are tied together, and you're absolutely correct. Language is the key, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind. If it's a kid, I would just suggest that, parents get in touch with whatever organization might be, Silent Voices or other organizations, that are co-hosting tonight or, are local to get the services needed and ensure that there's that communication and that deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf, blind kids are not being excluded. I know life is busy and it's not always easy, but it's not worth giving up on that connection and giving up on being able to bring everyone together.
Absolutely. And we know that learning a new language isn't that easy, but if you exercise a little patience, you're going to pick it up. Absolutely. Alicia?
Yeah, I would encourage different communication skills, whether that be writing or just ensuring you have eye contact. Um, and with interpreting and with it being free writing to pay. Um, it's really important when a family comes together to be able to communicate and to develop those relationships. Because if you don't develop those positive relationships, it has that long-lasting impact. So I would really recommend that.
Agreed. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Kismet.
Yeah, and I would just say, ask your kid, how was your day? What things do you want to do? Just have that connection and know what's important to them, know what they like.
And that same goes for adults as well. You need to have those conversations with children and adults. I don't think it matters the age, but agreed. It's so important to have that connection. And look at how this still impacts us all as adults here today, right? We really want to be aware of that. Just give me one moment, Vinu. Oh, my apologies, everyone. Bear with me. I think Ashley and then you, Vinu.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest, I know life is very busy and parents are, incredibly busy with work and all the other things they have to do. But often it would be so nice if parents could just try, one simple word. Just try to learn some ASL, and that will help your kids know that mom and dad can learn ASL, and they're busy and maybe overwhelmed, but they can still do it. And I think we need to be just honest and um, deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind people like there's another language. It's just if you're learning another language, it's the same, whether it be German, Chinese, whatever. You're learning ASL. Don't be too stressed. I know there's a lot going on already, but you can slowly pick it up and use that to communicate with your child. And that'll pay off when you're communicating with any deaf, hard of hearing, or deaf blind person, whether they be an adult, a senior, or whatever. Um, you don't need to feel afraid. I think deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind people really um, love being able to be part of that world and partake in conversations and get to have those opportunities. So I think for parents, maybe set up a routine in your daily routine, set up something simple that, um, I don't know what it might be, but uh, some simple daily routines like, oh, time to brush your teeth, please take out the garbage, whatever that might be. So learn some of those phrases so that you can communicate in that way. Oh, it'd be so nice if you could sign, it's time to brush your teeth before you go to bed, or, can you please take out the garbage, whatever that must be. Those are the daily things that you have to do. So just those simple phrases, those simple daily use phrases can really go a long way for building a kid's self-esteem. And for me, for sure, um, that was something that, was allowed me to connect more and be a part of that world that and the people in that world that I wanted to connect with. And there can be a lot of challenges and issues. People will say, oh, a deaf person can't do that. And we need to have this assumption that deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind can do anything. And with that kind of an attitude, the kids are going to have, a very unique and special life and a very successful life. And parents can make sure that kids have that full access to language and can communicate fully.
Thank you so much. And Vinu?
It's really interesting, mentioning hearing people learning sign language and how they can quickly learn sign. Um, I don't know what maybe a way you can learn sign quickly. I know that if you're looking to date someone and you meet someone, it can be a real motivator to learn sign language. That kind of exposure and that intent and desire to learn ASL. And of course, if you're out, at an environment where it's a little bit more hectic and there's more people talking, it can be harder. But those one-on-one environments where you can spend more time, and if you need to, you can write back and forth and establish that connection and build language that way. That can be a really good way. If you're feeling a little bit stressed on how to, learn ASL, what to do, just go out one-on-one. Out to a restaurant, just the two of you get to spend some time together. Um, if there's other folks involved, sometimes that can be distracting to the conversation at that early stages. So, just an idea to try.
Yes, and just thinking about Ashley's comment about how sometimes parents can feel overwhelmed trying to learn sign language and raise a child at the same time. But I agree wholeheartedly that you can pick up sign language alongside of your child, and that really deepens your connection and bond. And so now we have an opportunity for some questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand. I will pick someone, Vinu, when I get my first question. Oh, I just had asked for the interpreter if anyone on the panel has any questions. And I think Vinu had a question to start with. So my question would be, I know folks are very busy and that learning sign language can be difficult, but you can also communicate by writing back and forth. Take a breath. You don't have to be fluent in a day, so to speak. The point is to communicate. So you can start off by communicating, you can write back and forth, you can balance that out with sign language.
Yeah, if there are the other options, that's a good question.
So Tony had a great question in the chat. Sorry, Vinu. Sorry, can you just stop sharing your question and answers? I thought we could just make folks bigger, maybe.
Oh, I'll leave up the slide, but I'll repeat the question. Tony had a question. So for hard of hearing parents learning ASL, uh, this daughter is not very interested in learning sign language. So what's a way to get a child and to motivate a child to participate and be involved in those conversations? So I'm assuming the child is hearing in this situation, and mom and dad or parents are deaf. So how can you motivate a child to learn ASL to communicate?
Well, I suggest that you could find a deaf child the same age as your hearing child, and they can play together. And I think that's a good motivator to develop some sign language skills in your child.
Yeah, that's a great response. Vinu?
Well, in my experience, for folks who are hard of hearing, and if they have a hearing child, they tend to probably use spoken language more than sign language. But for example, deaf parents who have a hearing child, their hearing child just uses sign language because both parents are deaf. And so they are fully immersed in that signing environment and tend to pick that up a little quicker. So, as the harding of hearing parent who is sort of using spoken language and sign language, more often I think the child is going to use what it comes easier to them or more naturally, which would be the spoken language. And so, my suggestion would be to try signing all the way. If you notice that they're having trouble keeping up or understanding something, you can sort of give them some things to motivate, maybe sign a little slower. You can have your deaf and hard of hearing friends come around. People will exercise a lot of patience with kids and making sure that they're picking up the language. That would be one suggestion I have.
Yeah, that's one tip. Having a hearing kid and a deaf kid get to spend some time together, socialize. Manu, as you said here, using ASL only, not using your voice. Another option would be connecting to a deaf agency. Maybe they have a program, maybe a program for codas. I'm sure Silent Voices has something like that, and I assume there's something similar in BC or Saskatchewan. So there are programs out there for codas. So that could be another option to check your local agency or an agency in Canada to see what is available and to connect with that program so that your Coda kid can get involved. And Vinu, sorry, you wanted to respond?
And I also would encourage you to take those hearing kids to deaf events where they see other people using sign language, where they're able to be in that immersive environment. And I notice, for example, when my daughter goes to deaf events, um, she will really pick up language quite quickly. And when she comes home, I notice that she has picked up signs from other people, from socializing, from walking. And again, that peer to peer interaction is always so beneficial, kids learning from each other.
Yeah, they're always learning different signs for sure. And there's always new things to learn for them, right? And it doesn't matter if they're deaf or hearing. Any more comments from the panelists here? Yeah, Ashley.
Oh, my apologies. I strongly encourage uh, socialization. And depending on the age of the child, you can, very explicitly explain that you're deaf and that you need sign language. And I think that having those, um, you know, direct conversations with children can be challenging for sure, but it encourages that bond. And it really encourages the child to sign or, not use their voice more often. And when they socialize with other deaf folks, it definitely can help that child realize, oh, my parents are hard of hearing or deaf and they can't hear me when I talk. And they see that real world experience and they look, it has a different impact, I think, and they learn a little bit more. And, just the idea that they're now bilingual and that they know two languages and how cool is that? And that, making sure that that has a positive spin for them. And I think that it can be a really good experience and help that child then understand that their parents are deaf and that they need access to that sign language. And not only am I helping them, but they're helping me. And I think that's really important for them to understand.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. We'll just move on to the next question here. Vanu? Vanu,
Did
go
you want
ahead.
me to wait or? I was going to answer a question. I'm not sure if we're going on to a new question or not.
Maybe let me just introduce the question first. So Megan's question in the chat. Are there any strategies or tips that can be offered for parents who uh, there is going to be a big family gathering of hearing folks that they'll be attending? Is there anything they can do to prepare in advance of that visit and spending time with family or friends who don't know ASL? And how can they kind of help in that situation to support the deaf or hard of hearing, deaf blind child during that event? Vinu, go ahead.
Well, I can certainly provide my perspective. I live here in BC, and there is a organization here called Lila and Pip, and they teach sign language to infants and children on the weekend. And so that's a place where you could take family members, like those younger cousins, those family members' friends' kids, where they could learn some sign language as well. And I think that Deaf Children's Society might also have something similar. I don't know if I can 100% answer that. Maybe BC Family Hearing Resource Center might have something like that, but those are a couple of examples.
Ashley?
I think you can get in touch with other deaf folks, organizations. Sometimes they make visual cards with games, or you can explain to your family, we're going to play a visual game, or we're going to use these cards. Maybe there's a sign and a word, and you can make it into a fun game for everybody to learn a few signs. For thinking about Christmas, for example, maybe you do teach your family a couple signs like love and Christmas tree and, just simple things like that. Make a game out of it. And that would help uh, encourage that eye contact between folks. Um, the host family can then, um, you know, make sure that people are being as visual as possible, that they're feeling involved. Maybe there's some videos, or you can create some kind of a game, but just some way so that the kids feel involved, so that people are connecting. It doesn't have to be huge, just, maybe a couple of signs, just some way that people are connecting.
Yeah, thanks very much. Uh, Kiznette, did you have something to add?
Well, just thinking about your deaf or deaf-blind or hard of hearing folks, thinking about a family Christmas event, um, just ahead of time, thinking about maybe they can learn a couple of basic signs. So when that deaf person arrives to the party, that all of those folks going to the party ahead of time have learned a couple of signs. And that really makes that person feel included in part of the group. They don't have to be fluent. You could always hire an interpreter that could come and help socialize with that deaf person as well.
Yeah, thank you. And then let me just see here. And yeah, you can split the cost of the interpreter for sure. Alicia?
Alicia? And just, I think you could look at YouTube, you could, find a resource that could help you learn a few signs, that could help you communicate with that deaf person so that you're able to make that connection with them. I think that's so much better.
Yeah, thanks. There were one idea that I have, or a couple things that I could add, a few tips. So I'm from Ontario, and Silent Voices has a program that's called the Family Communication Program. And they bring in a deaf person to go into the home and to, teach them sign and to prepare for those events. So that's one example and one thing you could use. There is, I'm sure other agencies as well have similar programs to that. I'm from Ontario, so I know the programs out here. Okay. Okay, so if there's any deaf professionals who are on this, they can, come on and answer some of these questions if they have something that they wanted to add as well. So feel free to do that.
And sorry, do you mind? I missed what you said, Vanessa. I apologize.
Yeah, I was just saying that, deaf professionals would be welcome to come on and chime in on this conversation as well. I don't see anything else here. Let me just double check. And Andrea's comment, my son and daughter, they're hearing, but our codas and here in New Brunswick, there's anything but BC and Saskatchewan have different coda programs. Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sure New Brunswick has a program. I'm sure that there is something, and we can send out resources for various programs from across Canada. So we'll send that out and share those resources. Okay, and I see Teresa's in the comments there saying, yeah, get in touch. And Meg just chiming in for a special event or, an extended family dinner. You could ask the other family and friends to, contribute $10 to help cover the cost of an interpreter for a few hours for sure. That is definitely, something you could split the cost of and then hire an interpreter for the event. And it shows that, everyone's contributing to that inclusion as well.
Well, to be honest, I don't love that idea. Um, I think parents need to advocate to the government. I think that the government should be paying the cost of the interpreter for those social gatherings. I think that often deaf folks are so deprived of language and opportunity, and I think we really need to come together and lobby to the government to start contributing and making it possible for us to have access that we need in order to have fulsome lives. So that's obviously a long-term solution. Um, you know, funding, advocation and funding, and getting the government's involvement, I think, is what we're looking at for a long-term solution.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that as well. Some government support or funding, which already exists for medical interpreting and stuff like that. Thinking about, uh, personal events, uh, that could be financially challenging. Like, where would that funding come from? So that could be, where families cover that cost for something on their personal time for a family event. And, maybe an agency could cover some of that cost. It would really depend on the province and, the options that are available. It could really vary. So, yeah, it's a little tough. Okay. Um,
Well, I think that you can certainly ask folks to contribute to interpreters, but again, I think personal time might be different. And I do want to clarify about access. Really, full access is the key. Without access, really, what's the point? The deaf and deafblind or hard of hearing person isn't going to be included without access. So, yes, we can hire an interpreter. That's a form of accessibility because it gives you access to language.
yeah, I know in Ontario, the Canadian Hearing Society, CHS, has their interpreting service. And if there's a wedding, they cover an hour or two. And then if you want longer than that, that would be something that you pay the additional charge. So it really depends on, the case. In some places and some agencies can or can't. So it'll be, important to check with your local agencies and organizations. I see Teresa's in the comments in the chat there responding to some of that.
Well, again, I guess connected to these personal events, and lots of folks can't afford that. And so thinking about Manitoba, and they just announced um, that a number of private um, events are now going to be covered. So thinking about um, family events, those are personal. Funerals, that's a very personal event, allowing access to that. So thinking about what that means, a personal event, and how long we've been advocating for access, thinking about children and thinking about how we value those, and getting maybe some of the parents who have deaf children on board, helping us fight for some of those services. We really need to advocate from birth to death. We have to remember our seniors as well. I mean, there's just so much that we need to do.
Yeah. Uh, thank you for those. Any other comments before we move on? Oh, Ashley, yeah.
Well, again, just thinking about the deaf and deafblind and hard of hearing, we all need your support. We all need your support for our deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing children. They need your support. You know, the number one priority uh, is that we want to continue to fight and continue to advocate. And, you know, your kids, all these kids need support. They need access to language to grow. And so we have to continue to fight. We have to, keep going. Communication is so important.
Yeah, I agree. It is key for sure. And Terry, saying this webinar is great. Thank you for organizing this event. In Manitoba, we don't have the same level of service that BC or Ontario has. And this deaf person works with hard of hearing kids who are in a mainstream elementary setting, and many of them don't have families that will sign with them. Some will learn a little bit, but there's not a lot of resources and interpreters available in the community. So any suggestions of, what could be helpful with those kids that Terry works with? And then I do see there's lots of comments that have been added in the chat. Manitoba could be a good place to start with if you wanted to chime in. And Megan's comment is just to be aware of the energy and attention it can take to attend to everyone in a conversation, and in a setting it can be a lot of work. If you're lip reading, that's a lot of work, or in those kind of settings. So that's something to be aware of for sure. Megan also asked, are funerals considered personal time? And I think most of the time funerals are covered, but it would really depend on each particular province, what is happening there. But I'm sure most of them that's covered. And to comment here saying it could be the Convo app that's been released in the US, but not in Canada, and not sure. It seems like that hasn't been launched in Canada, but hopefully that will become available. And Terry's saying, Vanu, there's not a lot of kind of personal events that are covered, and one of the issues is that Manitoba doesn't have enough interpreters. There's just not enough interpreters in the community, and that Red River College has suspended their program for the last 3 years. So that means, the government funding isn't there, and there's no new interpreters graduating. And yeah, George Brown College does have an interpreting program. Vanu, go ahead. Oh, Ashley.
I did also want to mention So when you're communicating with deaf or deafblind or hard of hearing children, that it's really important that you listen to their frustrations, to their emotions, that you really take the time to acknowledge their feelings. Someone mentioned about fatigue, about listening fatigue and lip reading fatigue. And, you know, even if if you're using technology, that it is very tiring and it can be very fast. And we often need a break. We need a break to rest, to sleep. Sometimes it's very noisy. If the environment is noisy, it can be overwhelming. And you're watching that lip reading and you're trying to catch the conversation, and our eyes can become tired quickly. And so we need breaks. So if you see that a child's struggling and they seem worn out, try to offer them some sign language or some sort of visual option so that they can have a break. Ask them what you can do to help them. So at least they feel heard and seen and that their feelings are being recognized. It's so important to make that connection with them and let them know and ask them, do you need a break? I'm trying to listen to you. I'm not ignoring you. If they're behaving or crying or they're showing frustration or anger, listen to those cues, find out what the reason is behind that, maybe find another way to support them, guide them, connect with them.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll go to Vanu and then I'll make a last comment and we'll move on from there.
I just have two comments. Thinking about the Convo app being only available in the US, I do want to show you here that it is available in Canada, that I have used it. And you do need to contact and request it. But you can use it for a few minutes for those quick interactions. We know that interpreters are expensive, and so sometimes that is a other option. And thinking about the interpreting programs being suspended and the shortage of interpreters as well, here in BC, Douglas College paused their interpreter intake, and the community was screaming. And we got together and set up a committee, and we advocated for that. I was a part of that committee, and we did lobby and sit down with the government and let them know the dire circumstance that that would create to not have any more interpreters. And so it really seemed that the Accessibility Act that they had passed and then the suspension of the interpreting program were in conflict with one another. And so the government really seemed to take that into consideration. So then that interpreting program was then transferred over to Vancouver Community College, and we have continued to advocate. So my point to that would be that it's really important for the community to come together and advocate for those services.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I just wanted to add to this point as well. So for families, in my experience with my family, is I would say something and then it wouldn't change. And I feel like it's just been an ongoing cycle where I say something, it's, not really taken into consideration. So I would suggest, from my experience, think about for your kids, have that open conversation and make changes as you discuss those items as well. So some things to think about as we wrap up. How can we overcome dinner table syndrome? So learning American Sign Language, all of our panelists, including myself, had mentioned that as something to consider. And to use ASL as a language in events. So have the family connect using ASL and share that experience. So that can be both, the deaf and hearing family members, bridging that communication gap. Another suggestion is to have a visually friendly environment and things to think about when you're at a dinner table. Make sure you have good lighting at the table, make sure everyone is seated in a way that they can see each other, reduce distractions, make sure that people are seated in a way that they aren't blocked, and that there's nothing on the table that may be blocking someone. So if there's a big centerpiece at a wedding, maybe move that centerpiece out of the way so that everyone at the table can see each other and there is that visual access for communication. So you want to make sure that there's nothing on the table that is blocking you from seeing everyone at the table. And that way you can see each other's faces and get those kind of expressive signals that are on the face. Another option is using technology. At the dinner table, it can be very beneficial to use technology. It can ensure that deaf and hard of hearing folks are included. You can use, speech to text transcription, the automatic transcription, so that a phone has a transcript of what people are saying. There's a lot of different apps out there now. You can also use various visual tools, like we talked about the Convo app, and there are different options out there as well that you would be able to use. Our next suggestion is to hire an interpreter. So at a family event, a family dinner, hire an interpreter. That ensures that everyone's able to communicate and the event is more accessible. And again, we talked about being able to split the cost of an interpreter so that it isn't up to one person to pay for that service. Another idea, another option, is to bring a deaf friend or a deaf guest. And then they're able to be part of that conversation. It's another person to share a culture and share a connection with, and they can offer some suggestions of how to break down barriers. And it also provides, some communication access. Instead of it being one deaf person there, there's someone else there to chat with. Playing some deaf-friendly games is also another option. Charades, Pictionary, different signing games. There's lots of options to have visual games that put everyone on the same playing field for the game. So, our final thought here is that inclusivity starts with you. So you can start now incorporating some of these techniques and ways to enhance communication and inclusivity. Awesome. Thank you very much. Ashley, did you want to add a comment?
I did. I just wanted to add to Vanessa's comment about the fact that, you speaking to your family and you tell them what you need and nothing ever changes. And just thinking about how when a child turns about 12 and they hit those teen years, that their language advances and the things they think about, want to talk about, change. And so language needs to grow and change along with a person as they age. What they want to talk about, what they're interested in, what they're doing changes as well. And so nothing can stay stagnant.
Yeah, that reminds me of another example as well that I forgot to add, but now that you've reminded me, I'll add that in. For dinner tables, and one thing that is always been a pet peeve of mine, and I'm sure other folks have experienced as well, is that if someone's talking and I ask them what was said or I try to get clarification and they tell me that they'll just tell me later, that really shuts me down. And of course, I
Oh,
ask
yeah.
them what was talked about later, and they can't remember what, had happened, and they then can't share it with me later. And where's the fairness and inclusivity in that? Telling someone I'll tell you later does not make them feel included. So that's something that I would really recommend is to not do that. Very similarly, if there's some kind of a joke told and everyone's laughing, and the deaf person says, "Oh, what's the joke?" And you say, "I'll tell you later," and it
Hmm.
doesn't end up being funny later on. You've missed the moment, and that just leaves the deaf person feeling like they're not connected to the group. So I hope you've really enjoyed the webinar tonight. And I want to say a big thank you to the interpreters for this evening, Lisa McCarran and also Tyler Churchman. Thank you very much to our Zoom host, Levi Traxler, and myself as your moderator. Thank you to our panelists as well, Vanu, Ashley, Elisa, and Kisanet. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And finally, thank you so much to our audience as well. Thank you for joining us tonight. I really have enjoyed our evening and this conversation. And we'll be having our next webinar in January of 2025. So we won't be having one in December. So we will see you in the new year. So I hope you found tonight very informational and you've learned a lot. And thank you so much. Have a good night, everyone.